Okay, so like in the introduction, I'm studying systematics of small mammals, but that involves evolutionary biology as well, systematics, taxonomy, and evolutionary biology. So let's move on to the evolution of human brain. Now, why do we worry about evolution of human brain? Like we can look at the present situation, the present brain, and just not think about the evolution, right? But then understanding how the human brain evolved can provide insights to human cognition, behavior, and then susceptibility to, which is more relevant for the doctors, is the neurological and psychiatric disorders. So uh, evolutionary biology, connects every organism in the in this globe. So we have a connection through um, common ancestors, and uh, someone famous said, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." So we talk about so much biology, we learn so much biology, but then if you don't look at evolutionary biology, it doesn't really make sense. Like changes, even right now, evolution is happening, though we may ignore it. And then it's not only brain, but then diseases, viruses, bacteria, they all evolve, and they will evolve very quickly as well. So it's extremely important, but we may tend to ignore evolution at certain points. So making inferences about human brain evolution can be done in different ways. One is comparison with human ancestors. It's the ways that we can do is limited. It's not easy also. And then comparison of extant species, that is between apes and human, and then brain evolution of Homo sapiens. The other species is also being looked at separately. And then comparison among and within human races is another perspective that scientists are trying to look at, to try and understand whether, like current evolution and current differences between different human races, or even populations, we can call, if we don't like to call them races. And then study of human populations in general with time. Now, even if we start now to study in this country, the changes that may happen, you will eventually, within 10, 50, 40, or any 100 years, you will see some changes in the brain if you start even now to study. Now, to look at the first aspect, so what we can get from our ancestral or the fossils is just the size of the brain. That is all we can get from the fossils. So it has been, if you look at this diagram, if you look at this, these are all coming from scientific papers. If you look at this, you see that the evolution of the fossils go back to 7 million years. And then currently we have only Homo sapiens living as a human. But then you see the brain size, which is something that is talked of a lot. It has increased fourfold during these 7 million years. When you talk about evolutionary biology, millions of years is considered little time. Like it takes time for evolution to take place. And then this table is showing the volume of the change, which is the fourfold. And then you will notice here something that I will talk about later also, the Homo sapiens. Now we brag about having the biggest brain, but then it seems like at the beginning, or at a certain time period, it has started to decrease, and our brain size is currently decreasing. So it's something to worry about probably. Okay, so it has started our species had arisen around 3,000 years, 300,000 years ago in kind of late Pleistocene era, and for up to now. So these changes have happened. And if you look at this diagram, which is showing uh, our ancestors, and you see these Paranthropus, and then Ardipithecus, and then Australopithecus. These are, uh, like, you can't really say the connection between these fossil ancestors, fossilized ancestors, because we only find fossils, and then you can't really say the connection, which one is connected, which one is related to which one. There is some, little bit of DNA analysis where they can say something about the connections, but extracting DNA from fossils is not that easy, and it's not pure. But there are some studies that some scientists have done. So you can see that these ancestors are more like apes, like chimpanzees, whereas the Homo looks, like it's kind of similar. Now this is a Homo sapien. Our, initially they looked like this, and we changed gradually, and you see they are different from each other, but then they are not ape-like homos. And when you look at now, they have evolved. Homo sapiens have survived. I mean, this we are the only species that survived. But then you see here that some of the other homos or species were kind of coexisting with us. But if you see the distribution, uh, they are either in Africa or Southeast Asia, or Southeast Asia and Europe and so on. So one or two species that is talked about a lot is are these Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, which have coexisted in Europe. So it's it's important in a way for brain evolution, because apparently the studies show that Homo neanderthalensis had a bigger brain than Homo sapiens. So since they coexisted, so there are theories, but it's still we cannot confirm exactly, but uh, they may have interbred also. So Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis may have interbred. So so their genes may have come to come to Homo sapiens, or it's maybe still out there among Homo sapiens, uh, people we call Homo sapiens. So that is, in a way, is important. Other than that, like the somehow the Homo neanderthalensis was went extinct due to, like, obvious reasons. Integration, one thing, and then the other thing is the fighting that, like we even currently see, like in US or the Americas or Australia, how, I mean, very not so long ago, how humans were like almost replaced. The people who were living there, indigenous people, were almost replaced. So there are a lot of, like, thinking going on. So it could have been that somehow they are not there anymore or here anymore. Okay, so now, apart from the size of the brain, with the increase of the size of the brain, there is another study which is looking at like, to say, like, you measure the volume of the brain, but then at the same time the blood, like doctor said, how much blood is being pumped to the brain. So that matters a lot. If we get brainier and brainier, or the brain becomes bigger and bigger, you need a lot of blood to go to the brain if it has to function properly. So there is a study where they looked at how much or the size of the blood vessels, comparison of these skulls ancestors, and they came up with this graph where you see again Neanderthalensis, Homo neanderthalensis is above Homo sapiens, even because they had a bigger brain and they needed more blood. But we are not sure whether they were the cognition or they had better abilities than us, or whether the skills were different, or the how they interact and with each other, or the social interaction. Those things like we can only kind of predict, but then they definitely had a bigger brain and probably used it for their survival and reproduction. So the second way of looking at is a comparison between the existing or extant species, apes and humans. So this is kind of easier. You can get more information on what are the differences that are there, and then try and build a tree and see maybe the ancestors were like this. So this is the currently available tree where the chimpanzee is obviously, everybody probably knows chimpanzee is our closest relative. And then around, like we had shared a common ancestor. So there's a lot of attention. Scientists do look at other apes as well, but then there's a lot of attention going for these chimpanzees and comparison between chimpanzees and humans, so that we can try and understand through differences what may have happened in the past. So one thing is genetic differences. Now this is again a debatable issue. The earlier studies showed that there is 1% difference between the genome, the genetic material between the Homo sapiens and the chimpanzees, and then some went down to 98.6, some went down to 95. But then recently there was a paper in Nature which went so far as 87%, but then similarity. They are saying they looked at different, the fast evolving genes, which they say were ignored by earlier studies, but still it's kind of open for debate because they don't exactly say 87%. You have to go through the whole paper and kind of calculate this number. So it's not like a boom, this is it kind of finding that they are trying to say. So it's kind of it gives you kind of doubts whether there were about 100 authors, so it's a huge Nature study published study. It's good, obviously, but there's like people are kind of looking at it doubtfully also. Now this comparison, like even if we have this same genome or the 99% of similarity, the genes we know act differently. They interact with each other, or they behave differently, or the upregulation, downregulation, and so on, which is different in chimpanzees and humans. So that is something that needs to be really deeply looked at, and it's not that easy. Comparison, just extract DNA and comparison is easy, but then how they are actually functioning is a different story, which is really not that easy to study. But obviously by looking at, this is Jane Goodall, who was studying famously chimpanzees and apes, and especially chimpanzees. And by looking at these two, you see how different they are. You don't have to look at the picture even, but then so you can't just go by the genetic similarities, obviously. So there is a lot more happening with genes that we need to really dig deeper. So one gene that they found ARHDAP11B, which is human specific gene. So it's not found in chimpanzees. So this may have been important for expansion of neocortex during human evolution. So this is like straight link to higher level cognitive abilities that we have. And they, like in Western nations, unlike us, they do research using, animal models. We kind of restrict that in this country, like manipulative studies, experiments. We kind of are afraid to do that, or we are reluctant to do that. Someone has used fetal marmoset study using these, looking at these gene expression, putting it there under control of its own human specific promoters and so on. And then they found something interesting, but these are really not easy studies to do, extremely difficult, complicated studies to do. And they came up with this gene, that the ones who had these genes had greater elaboration of neural progenitors, the cells, progenitor cells and neocortex in fetal marmoset. So that shows that this gene is actively doing something, and it's really important in human evolution. So somehow at some point this gene has arisen in human population and not in chimpanzees, or somehow when we divided from our common ancestor, we had this, or the chimpanzees had it and they disappeared, or the other way around, we got it. So there's another, like very complicated studies that they do using organoids, which they make organs, kind of, like cell, a collection of cells, and they do knock down or knockout experiments where they were able to find that these cells actually, when this gene was not active, the cells, the stem cells, brain stem cells, decreased to the level of a chimpanzee. So that's quite an interesting study. So these are really important when it comes to neurodegenerative diseases treating or treatment. Another gene is, interestingly, only 2 amino acid sequence difference between the chimpanzee and human. It's there in both species, and may have been important step in evolution of language. Even this 2 amino acid difference seems to be doing something big. So when we talk about that 1% or 2% or 1.6% or whatever the percentage, it doesn't matter at the end, because of this kind of studies that are coming up and showing that, like it's maybe they are having the same genes, but they are acting differently. Even, slight difference is important to make a huge change in our behavior or brain or anything. And then mutations in this particular gene can lead to speech and language disorders, apparently, which is something important. And then the other factor when you look at this comparison is neuroanatomical differences. Now, brain volume, we looked at with our ancestors, which had a 4-fold increase. But when you look at chimpanzee and human, chimpanzees have the volume is only 3-fold difference between the chimpanzee and human. And then neuron count is also important, because there is a huge difference in there comparing the other, gorillas and rhesus macaques and all that also. But then to look at chimpanzees in particular, they have 6.7 to 7.4 billion, whereas we humans have 16.3 billion neurons. So that also matters, the size, the number of neurons, it could be lower. size doesn't define the number of neurons we have, but we do have, compared to chimpanzees, a lot. Then neural connections are also important. It is very different from chimpanzees and humans, contributing to unique human cognitive abilities. So this brain forms strength. It's able to form and strengthen these connections throughout life, a process that is fundamentally, like we as humans are able to learn until, like quite far in life. So that is because of this aspect where this is also called neuroplasticity, where the chimpanzees have less neuroplasticity compared to humans. Humans can, there is extensive synaptic pruning and myelination is like it's extended in humans up to 25 years, and then it may go beyond that. You know better than me. But it stops at an early age in chimpanzees. So there is a big difference in that also, because our brain can change, and it's called plasticity, changes with the environment, which is important uh, uh, when it comes to learning, cognition, and culture. So if you look at the human population, if we are born in some other country, you are quite different from a Sri Lankan. And then if you take a Sri Lankan and put that person, a child in another country, they are going to grow up as culturally different. So that kind of changes. But the chimpanzees wouldn't do that. Chimpanzee in Sri Lanka and chimpanzee in America would be the same. We have one in the zoo. It's the same chimpanzee that you find in Africa. So, and then there is another factor that there are studies on, which is heritability. Apparently, the heritability, when it comes to heritability, it's lower in humans compared to chimpanzees. The morphology of the human cerebral cortex and human or the structural changes, which goes from generation to generation through DNA, heritability, which is lower. So that is important in the sense, because we are more responsive for molding by the environment influence. So when you look at evolution, all the changes that we see, there is this DNA influence, and then of course there's environmental influence, which will define who we are, behaviors, or what we learn, how we think, and all that is happening with the brain. So the genetics is there, but then apparently, and looking at this also, it's it is seen that the environmental influence is big with humans, uh, and it's obvious, like when you look at how like a student can come to the university, and then like can it's sadly to get harassed and be not be comfortable in that place and go through trauma and all that. Because why? Like if the brain didn't allow that to happen, a chimpanzee wouldn't care what type of harassments that they go through. They are also nasty, but then they do certain things, but I don't go into that. But then like if our brain didn't allow that, something like brainwashing also, like you can completely change the way you think. You just put you into a room and completely change the way you think. You forget about your parents, where you came from. All that is possible with our brain. So it's a sad situation. It's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. So we talk about good things with the cognition and all that, but then when it comes to this easily being trained mind becomes a problem also. If you don't train it properly, and if you don't control that, especially when it comes to younger people, even older people, we get harassed once in a while. Uh, but then in schools, uh, in the universities, and then normally outside population, there is harassments, and how they take it in is a problem, and then it's something that we need to really concentrate and do something about. Okay, and then interestingly, Homo sapiens brain is currently shrinking, and it has, like, this is one scientist saying it started 100,000 years ago, and it's again, like, evolutionary biology is quite new compared to, say, anatomy or physiology that scientists have been studying for a long time, but evolutionary biology is quite new. So it's things are still being debated. So this one scientist, only one scientist, is saying 100,000 years ago the brain started to decrease the size wise, because that's when humans started to produce symbolic artifacts and engravings with meaningful geometric images. So there must be something in it, but then again, people, scientists are arguing about it. So the bigger brain is not necessary, he's saying, for doing those things. Uh, and it's better to have a smaller brain, simpler brain, which is easier to, or the energy, you can conserve energy, like the you don't need a lot of blood to be sent up there, situation. But then majority is arguing for 10,000 years ago that that is the time our brain started to shrink, because we shifted from hunting and gathering way of life to agriculture. So you stay at one place and start uh, doing your agriculture. You need a different way of thinking when you do agriculture than hunting and gathering. Like, safety is a big issue when it comes to hunting and gathering. Hunter gatherers have to think a lot, and then kind of like, it's the evolution is happening. Like, we started off 300,000 years ago, we evolved at that time. For right now, we think we started or evolved around 300,000 years ago, million years ago, 1,000 years ago. Okay, so but we are still evolving, we are still changing. Evolution is changing through time. So self domestication, now you can very easily understand this. Now we ourselves decided to make ourselves domesticated, like we stay in our houses, we build our houses, we are very very safe. I mean, once in a while a snake could come, but then lions and leopards, and they won't come into your house. So the safety is not a big issue. And then the food, finding food is easy. You don't have to go hunting every day, and you don't have to worry so much about it. You just go to the supermarket next door and buy food and so on. So the same way, the domesticated animals, if you compare a cat, domesticated cat, or cows, and animals that we have, dogs, now they can't, if you release them back into the nature, they can't survive on their own, and so they have lost quite a lot because of the domestication. So the same thing may have happened to us through our self domestication, coming into a enclosed area and being comfortable and all that. Our brain may have started to shrink. So that is, I think, is a better argument than this 100,000 years argument. But then we should always keep, an open mind. And then something that we always have to think about is the natural selection. So the ones who had that is what Darwin said. Darwin didn't talk about evolutionary biology. Evolutionary biology was there for quite some time. Even in India, people say that 5,000 years ago, 2,500. We know if you know what I'm talking about. Like there were people who talked about evolutionary biology. It's not something new, but then what Darwin said is the natural selection, which is extremely important though. So this brain shrinking um, and all the other rest of the changes or the evolution that we see must have been helped with this natural selection. So which is hard to find with our ancestors, but then for our current situation, we can see how COVID basically, naturally selected certain individuals. We don't talk about it like that. It's sad that lot of people died, but then that is natural selection acting on the human population. The ones which didn't have a good immune system, or they didn't practice the good methods that were told them to do, we asked them to practice, or something. So it's natural selection that you can see. So evolution right before our eyes. Okay, so taking a step, like closer basically, is to compare different populations, we should say, but then the papers are saying races. Uh, you know, uh, one study, which the first one was done by a group of Americans actually. They looked at East Asians, means Chinese, uh, seems to be smarter to me. Chinese are doing really well. They have their way of getting things done, very different from the Western nations. Western nations are more open, and probably the Chinese are less open, but they are like doing extremely well. So, but they were good, like brainy people, like many years ago. Chinese, even Indians, Sri Lankans, we lost it somewhere with colonization probably. Uh, so they compared and said that the Europeans, comparatively, East Asians have bigger skulls, so that means bigger brains than Europeans and Africans. Okay, and then another study says between Europeans and white and black Americans, they call it like that, sadly, but then between them, or African Americans or white Americans. So the white Americans are more brainier compared to. It depends on which population that you select and so on. So it's complicated. But then this is something that we can actually study. Comparison between apes and humans is difficult, but it's not something that Sri Lankans could do. But this is something that look, we can do, but it's really will be hard to publish, because of the racism, and I don't know what will be. But then somehow they came up with. But you can look at it in a good way, in a different way. So the studying of population at present, and then with time, as I said, 50, 100 years, you can see whether the natural selection is actually taking place or not. One thing that we should remember is that, like we have kind of taken us, domestication plus, taken us out of nature. And we are acting as if we are not part of nature, but we are part of nature. We were like a couple of generations ago, even Sri Lankans and a lot of other nations, we were living with nature, making sure that the nature is looked after properly, and then not over consuming and all that. But things have changed so much that we have taken ourselves out of nature, and then of course, I mean, this is the medical treatment is obviously we have to do, but then like looking at it in a different perspective of natural selection, and as a zoologist comparing the animal populations and humans, it seems like our population is becoming weaker because of medical treatment also. So that is something, I mean, we can't avoid. Being human, you have to do that. But then our population becomes weaker unless like COVID, it's so sudden. So the natural selection was able to react. But in other slower cases, we are more, carefully looking after your family members. And we are talking about everybody's family members. It's not somebody's life. It's somebody's family member who comes to the hospital. So it's someone important for somebody. So so you doctors are doing a great job looking after them. So, but as a population, we may be doing something bad, but we can't help it.